Thank you, everybody. You might be wondering why a marine biologist slash geneticist slash genetic engineer is so interested in ancient Egypt. And I'll tell you that this is an incredible fascination for me because of the amount of time the Israelites spent in Egypt, the number of references to Egypt and the prophets, the interactions between Egypt and Israel. Egypt is a large part of the Old Testament. And yet, when you look at Egyptian history, even Christians writing about Egyptian history, there are very few references to Scripture in it. So about 10 years ago, CMI, Creation Ministries, we decided that we wanted to do a major research effort into ancient Egypt. And we're finishing up now a 9-part series. We wanted to do a documentary on Egypt. But after we went there with our first tour, we realized we couldn't do one documentary, so we did 9. And that should be out probably by the end of the year. All different subjects. My subjects are mainly the scientific engineering subjects, but I also did a long talk on the age of the earth and how Egypt fits into that. Also questions about how long the Israelites were in Egypt. We tackled who's the Pharaoh of the Exodus, who the Pharaoh of Joseph, when they came into Egypt, and all those sorts of questions. It's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Tonight, though, engineering. I want to talk about the ancient Egyptians as people, as human beings, and what they're able to accomplish and how that reflects the image of God in their lives. Some of this has already appeared in pages of Creation magazine, and I know there'll be more articles on it, especially as we get this Egypt Chronicles, whatever we're going to call it, coming out. But we have a lot of information on Egypt on creation.com. A lot. I mean, starting with Gary Bates' article a long time ago, Egypt Framing the Issues, where he lays out all the controversies and possible answers to each controversy, and there's a lot of them. And then Gavin Cox wrote an article about a pharaoh named Shishak, mentioned in Scripture. Well, he's Shoshank the first of Egypt, who was not Egyptian. No, he's from south. He's from Sudan. They had conquered Egypt. He's the first pharaoh mentioned in Scripture by name. None of the older ones are mentioned by name. And on and on. We've got lots of articles on creation.com. We also have a lot of video content that we produce on Facebook or on X or on Instagram or whatever, TikTok. We are putting our videos everywhere we can get. They're there. So if you want more information, when we're done, find it on one of those platforms. And I highly recommend Creation Magazine, by the way. Something else I would highly recommend, I know a lot of people here already get this, but if you don't, if you would like to sign up for our email newsletter, I highly encourage that. And once a week, we're going to put together a list of the articles we publish that week, and we're always publishing new material. We might have an announcement of a new book that we've just made, and there's new books coming out very soon, or maybe an interview with someone like me who used to be an evolutionist, and I explain why I'm not anymore. A lot of cool stuff there. If you'd like to get our newsletter, it's easy. We ask for a name, an email address, and a zip code. Or if you have a smartphone, you know how to use the QR code reader, just go beep on the QR code, and that'll just get you signed up right away. These are going to go around as I'm speaking. Appreciate that, Barry, whenever you're ready. And I'm just going to jump into some of the things. Now, there's not going to be a lot of scripture in this talk. That makes me a little uncomfortable. I try to make everything I do very scripturally based, but we're going to talk about technology. What Bible verses do you pull out of that? We're also going to skip over a lot of the stuff I talked about a minute ago about all the interactions of Egypt with the Old Testament. But just for example, though, here are the 5 pharaohs named in Scripture and where they fit in the timeline after King David. All of them are named in the correct order, and they're mentioned in Egyptian history. We know these people lived. This is an amazing way to tie Egyptian history into biblical history. Most people don't even know that. Article on our website. Or how about this? I'm an amateur genealogist. I've been studying my family for 30 years at least, 35 years probably. And so I'm really into genealogy. Well, I'm also into biblical genealogy. In fact, I just wrote a book on biblical genealogy, which will be out by the end of the year. But I remember thinking that I know there's a contention within Christianity. The question of how long the Israelites were in Egypt. Most people say, well, in Exodus says 430 years to that very day they came out of Egypt. So they say, they're in there 430 years. But no scholars, even the conservative scholars, believe that. And so one thing I did was I looked at all the family trees I could find that went through their time in Egypt. So that's what the brackets indicate. That's called the sojourn, the time the Israelites were in Egypt. So here's people that were born before they got to Egypt. These people lived in Egypt. Here's people at the Exodus and people in red who lived in Israel afterwards. And I'm looking at these family trees, and I noticed that they connect. You know, a woman marries a man, and there's... I would have a hard time building that family tree if there's missing names. But there are zero conflicts and zero ambiguities. But also, I could not span that time frame if it was 200 or 430 years. There's not enough names. That was my first indication that maybe the scholars are right and they weren't there for that long. And then I did this. I built a timeline. So here's a timeline of Egyptian history. The Exodus, I'm not going to go through the dates, but you can pretty much count the conquest of Canaan to 1406 BC, and they left Egypt in 1446 BC, plus or minus a couple of years, but that's about right, 1446. Well, if they were in Egypt for 430 years, this is the family tree of Moses. Here's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We know Jacob went to Egypt, and we know how old he was. Here's Joseph. We know how old Joseph was when he went to Egypt. We know how old he was when he died. Here's Joseph's brother Levi, who's older than Joseph. We know how old Levi was when he died. Joseph had a son named Kohath, who was born before they got to Egypt. And we know how old he was when he died. He had a son named Amram. We know how old he was when he died. And Amram's son was Moses, and his other son Aaron, and his daughter Miriam. And we knew how old all these people were when they died, and we know that Moses was 80 years old at the Exodus. You cannot span 430 years with that list of names. Even if I did here, Kohath was born the year they got to Egypt, and Amram was born the year Kohath died. Oh, by the way, Jochebed, Moses' mother, is the daughter of Levi, because Amram married his aunt, Jochebed. So this is impossible. There must be missing generations in the Bible, right? Not if you adopt a 215-year sojourn. In fact, not only did the dates line up, we have wiggle room. We can slide these names left and right and still fulfill all the data. Oh, cool stuff, huh? Again, a little side issue, but I had to throw that in there because it's biblical and it's fun to talk about. We also believe that once you get a good grasp of Egyptian history, that we can identify the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Because if you just lay down the pharaohs of the new kingdom, King Tut is over here somewhere, right? There's King Tut right there. Hatshepsut, the famous queen of Egypt, is over here. Well, if you just take these and you line it up, you get a man named Amenhotep II, who's not the oldest son. He can't be, because the Pharaoh did not die in the 10th plague. But the next Pharaoh also has to be not the oldest son, because the Bible says Pharaoh's son died in the 10th plague. It wasn't just babies that died, it was the firstborn men, period. So we need two Pharaohs in a row that are not firstborn sons. And being that Moses was in Midian for 40 years, and God said, oh, the people who sought your life are now dead. You can come back to Egypt. We need a long-reigning Pharaoh. And right there is the only time in Egyptian history where that is fulfilled. Cool. It's also nice to put this in this context because whenever Joseph arrives, whether it's 215 or 430, doesn't matter, but when he arrives in Egypt, we have to have a Pharaoh that arose that did not know Joseph, and that is perfect for the rise of the new kingdom. The new kingdom is when Egyptians reestablished control over their country. They had lost it during what's called the Second Intermediate Period, where foreigners were controlling Egypt. They reconquered their own country, and this led to King Tut and the other famous, all the pharaohs buried in the Valley of the Kings. That's all new kingdom material. In fact, it's not even that old. The pyramids are built at least 1,000 years before that. But that's your list of kings. This is neat. This is amazing. The Bible looks like it's true. And you just take it at face value, and there it is. But let's talk about the Egyptians. Let's talk about what man knew early on. We get a hint of that in Genesis chapter 4. Adah bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was a forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. That's all the technological development we're told about before the flood. They had livestock, they had tents, they had musical instruments, and bronze and iron. Oh, and Noah could build a really large boat. That's it. After the flood, what's their level of technological innovation? Well, they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had bricks for stone and bitumen for mortar. That's it. We're not told about writing. We're not told about the wheel. We're not told about astronomy. Nothing. This is all the Bible talks about. But imagine that people are spreading out on the earth after the Tower of Babel event in small groups. In a small group, you don't have extra people to make a priest class or a teacher class, or no, everyone's doing everything for the community. Everyone has to work. There's no extra food. But as the population starts to grow, you get what's called a division of labor. You have enough people growing food that some people can be soldiers, someone's the king. You have priests and you have scholars, that it only comes with population size. In fact, think about it. Technology would not exist if there weren't 8 billion people in the world. We would not have iPhones if there weren't 8 billion people. It takes that many people, not 8 billion, but it takes millions of people to build a smartphone. And not a single person can build one. Nobody knows how they're built. No one knows how to manufacture all the parts. But together, people can do amazing things. And when Egypt was together, once the population grew large enough, and with the times they were united, they did amazing things. This is early Egyptian history. Later on, they weren't building pyramids. They were digging holes in the ground and putting their pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings and tombs. They weren't building pyramids. And these pyramids were built in less than 30 years apiece. Within the lifetime of the pharaoh, one pharaoh, I'm going to show it in a minute, built 3. What? But this isn't even the interesting part. No, this is actually late Egyptian history. The coolest stuff is like the earliest stuff, like the Egyptian Stonehenge. Did you know they had a Stonehenge? It was only recently found, a couple years ago. It's just a stone circle, it's a calendar, and it's an observatory, and it's clear what this is once we know about the other ones in the world. And the interesting thing about this is it's found in the middle of a desert, nowhere near anything else. But when it was built, it wasn't desert, because Egypt used to be very wet. In the earliest times of Egyptian history, there were a lot of people living in what are now complete desert areas. But also more interesting, it's right there. That is right next to the Tropic of Cancer, the place in the world where on one day a year the sun is directly overhead. Now, if I was trying to find the Tropic of Cancer today, and all I had was like a string and a stick, I wouldn't get closer than that. Or if I had a whole bunch of sticks in different places, and I'm running around the desert, it's like, okay, not that one, not that one. Oh, hey, this one right here, there's no shadow at noon. The sun is directly overhead. You wouldn't get closer than that. I really do believe they put that there on purpose. Consider 220-ish BC, a man named Eratosthenes. He was the head librarian of the Library of Alexandria. He was born in Aswan, where he knew that at some one day a year, the sun hit the bottom of the well. It was straight up, pretty close to straight overhead. And knowing that, he measured on that same day, on the summer solstice, the angle of a stick or something in Alexandria, and it was 7 degrees. He said, oh, I must be 7/360th around the world from that point right there. And because he was a chief librarian, he had all the maps. And they surveyed Egypt routinely so he could calculate the distance from here to there in stadia, whatever that is. So there's some scholarly debate about how long it was. But depending on which unit of measure he used, the one they think he used, he was 72 miles off. 200 BC. Yeah, no one ever believed the earth was flat, by the way. That is a lie. No one ever did. We cannot find any record of someone say, yeah, the earth is flat. It's not true. And this is, early stuff. Anyway, that's cool. But something about Egypt. There are no trees. They have no wood. Oh, they have palm trees, but palm trees aren't structural wood. They're too weak. They don't have oak. They don't have maple. They don't have hickory. They don't have cedars. They have, though, lots of stone. And the cool thing about Egypt is the entire geologic column is represented in this country. We have the newest stuff, the sands and the muds that are deposited by the Nile River and all along the Nile River Valley. And then we have what's called a tertiary sandstone. So the fossil record over here, we have what's called the Achaean, the Proterozoic, the Paleozoic, where you get like weird things and trilobites and corals and things like that. Then you have the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, the middle life, dinosaurs. Then the Cenozoic is things you recognize. That's the basic fossil record. It's all here. We have tertiary, which is pretty new, sandstones. Tertiary, again, limestones. We have Cretaceous, like you ever see Jurassic Park? Most of those dinosaurs are Cretaceous dinosaurs, not Jurassic dinosaurs. You have the Cretaceous, the Jurassic, and the Triassic. That's the Mesozoic era. They're all here. And then we have what we call creation rocks. Really, really, really old stuff. No fossils. It's just crystalline rock, like we see at the base of the Grand Canyon. It cuts all the way through the layers to the basement rock, which is creation rock. They're going to take this, and they're going to become masters of sand and stone. And the geology of Egypt is going to dictate what we see in Egypt. So when we see my favorite place, Hatshepsut's Memorial Temple, mortuary temple. On the other side of the hill behind it is the Valley of the Kings. And that stairway is lined up. If you go through the mountain, it lines up with her tomb. And if you go this way, many miles down toward the river, it lines up with the main avenue of the largest temple complex on earth in Luxor. It's in a line. So she was architecturally a genius. But that is what kind of rock? Limestone. There is contention within creationism about when the flood ended. Did it end? An easy place to draw the line is when the dinosaurs go extinct, because there's a huge change in the types of fossils that are found in the next rock. When you get from the Mesozoic to the Cenozoic, everything changes. So a lot of people, that must be where the flood ended. But if that's true, all of that has to be post-flood. That's a massive problem. How can you get massive limestones deposited over massive areas when people are supposed to be living here? So I'm going to spin it around and say, no, this has to be flood deposited material, not post-flood. Just a little aside. Now, let's go. Now, Hatshepsut is, again, New Kingdom. Let's go back to the Old Kingdom. Egyptian history works like this. You had the pre-dynastic period, no kings, hunter-gatherer people scattered around, not much evidence for them at all, which means they weren't there for 100,000 years, because they would have left a lot more evidence. It's a shorter time frame. But you have the pre-dynastic period. Then you have what's called the Old Kingdom. The Old Kingdom falls apart, and you have an intermediate period. Then you have the Middle Kingdom. There's not very good evidence for the Middle Kingdom. It's really hard to piece together. We know some pharaohs, and everyone looks sad. The pharaohs look, their jowls are drooped, and their eyes are like puffed out, and that's the carvings in hard stone they made of their pharaohs. They look sad and tired. That's the Middle Kingdom. Then you have the second intermediate period where the Hyksos come and control Egypt, and I think that's when the Israelites came in. And then you have the New Kingdom. And after that, you had the Greeks, the Romans, and the Egyptians, and the Greeks, the Persians, because they fought a lot, and then you have the Romans, and then the Muslims, and then the Christians, and then the French, And this big mess. Okay, you got the point. That's the basic sketch of Egyptian history. Let's go back to the end of the pre-dynastic period, the beginning of the Old Kingdom. First pyramid ever built at a place called Saqqara. This is Djoser's Step Pyramid. This is really, really cool. I thought it was cool when I saw it, and the more I've studied it, the cooler it gets. Now, there's another pyramid in the foreground here. This is much later, and it was robbed. They stole the limestone from the outside, they stole most of the supporting limestone from the inside, and the whole thing just crumbled into a pile. That's what most pyramids are, because people stole all the stuff because it was nice, fancy rock. But that's a much later. There are tens of thousands of tombs around here. There's so much material. They estimate maybe 5% of Egypt has been excavated. But at this place, I wrote an article, Egyptian Mummies and Hebrew Perfume. That's a cool, fun article. They found at Saqqara an ancient Egyptian mummification factory. And for a long time, we knew, reading their hieroglyphs, it's actually not hard to read hieroglyphs, by the way. It's not. You can teach yourself. I did too. It's easy. Just takes a little while to memorize the science. But at Saqqara, they found this ancient Egyptian mummification factory. We've known from their hieroglyphs the names of the things, but we didn't know what the things were. But then we found jars with the names labeled and with remnants on the inside, so we're able to sample it chemically. It's like, oh, that's birch tar, or that's frankincense mixed with citrulline or something like that. And some of their things that they were using for mummification only grow above 3,000 meters in the Himalayas. What? Some of them may have grown in Indonesia. So the Egyptians were at the center of a world trade network. By the way, something I point out in this article, when Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, they were at Dothan. Dothan is on that highway. They brought their sheep to sell to the caravans. Oh, and a brother too. Hey, take a brother, woo! And he goes to Egypt, and history changes. But mummies, like the earliest mummies, they're not in mummy pose. They're not in this pose. They're just lying on their side and like they're sleeping, and they have a headrest there. And that's really interesting. Some of the mummies aren't preserved very well. This is Seqenri Tao. He wanted to be the first king of the new kingdom, but he got killed in battle with the Hyksos. You can see his skull is cracked in two places. It was several days from the battlefield, more than probably several days, before they got him to the embalming complex. So his body, yuck. But other ones are preserved extremely well. Here's Amhos. This is the other guy. This is his son. This is the first king of the new kingdom who reunited Egypt, and is probably the Pharaoh that did not know Moses. This is Amenhotep II, who's our candidate for the Pharaoh of the Exodus. That man might have did not know Joseph. That man might have talked to Moses. And strangely, he's got bumps all over him. As in one of the plagues. I don't remember which plague. Remember the plague? Now, they did leave for us a lot of records. They told us what they did, sometimes. Here's a tomb in the Saqqara area. And inside this tomb, I've been here 5 times now. I'm going to go back again in February. By the way, we have a couple of open spots for our tour in March. Go to creation.com. It's got to be done like right now because we're starting to buy plane tickets because we have to fly from Cairo up to Luxor. And then we take a cruise ship for 3 days up the Nile to Aswan. That's my favorite place in the world. So we might have a couple spots left. But in this tomb, can you see the carving here? There's a guy. Here's another guy. There's a wooden sled and a stone statue. But this guy has a rope, and there's a water jug on his shoulder, and he's pouring water in front of the sled. What's he doing that for? They don't have wheels. Here's another picture. 175 men pulling ropes, and there's a gigantic stone statue on a wooden sled. And look at that. There's a guy pouring water in front of the sled. What's he doing? Well, we've figured out with some physics here, if you have sand with just the right water content, not too much, not too little, the coefficient of friction drops by about 30%, maybe 25%. It makes it slippery. Too much water and it builds up, just the right amount, and you can slide things on the sand. Oh, brilliant. They knew that thousands of years ago and we forgot. If I said, hey, you go pull that heavy thing across the grass or the dirt or whatever, you'd be like, no way, I can't do it. Just think like an Egyptian. But they weren't quite masters of sand and stone. They tried to build a dam across one of these wadis that's east of Cairo. It's a massive dam. It's wider than this room, higher than the ceiling, has a core with mud bricks on top of that and stone, and is all these different amazing layers. And it lasted until the first big rainstorm. Millions of man-hours of work washed away, and they didn't try to rebuild it. However, over at Saqqara, it was just recently realized. So here's where the step pyramid is. To the west of that, there's this gigantic catchment basin that all flows down toward a step pyramid. And right here, there's a dam blocking that exit from that valley. There's a dam there. Oh. And then around the step, here's a step pyramid here. It's inside a walled enclosure. And around that walled enclosure, there is a giant ditch. It's about 30 feet sheer rock cut ditch, 30 feet deep, maybe 15 feet wide, maybe less than that, around the whole thing. And it connects to the dam. What? Here's you can see that from space, you can see the outline of the old dam buried under the sand. Here's the rock-cut channel that goes around the whole entire complex. So, some crazy people are looking at all these things, and they realize that there is a tunnel from the step pyramid underneath the entire complex, about 30 feet down, that connects to that channel they cut around the outside wall that connects to the dam. It's a water pipe. What? And then when you look at the miles of passages underneath the step pyramid, what is all these things over here, and what is going on? And when you're in the step pyramid itself, you go down this tunnel that robbers cut through the rock, and you get inside it, and there's a giant hole in the ground. It goes on like 50 feet. And the bottom of the hole, there's this thing that you might think is a tomb. It's not. It's limestone with granite. No, it's limestone and a granite plug. It's about this big around, and it looks like it can be raised and lowered. And that connects to the tunnel that could have had water flowing through it. And so some people have thought that maybe this box with the plug could be used like an elevator, where you could flood underneath the pyramid, and that would raise a wooden float. Then you could lock a platform with heavy stuff on it in place, drop it, put more supports in there, and raise it up some higher. So by filling and draining and filling and draining, you could take heavy things and lift them up in the air. This is not possible. They couldn't have been that smart. But all the parts are there, as if maybe they were that smart. I'm not telling you this is an elevator, because that is way beyond rational thought. And yet, as an engineer, because I went to engineering school, not an engineer, I went to an engineering school, I look at this, I see all the parts, I say, yes, that's an elevator. Oh. Now, they did leave us other clues of what they did. Here we have two workmen, carved in stone, and they have a chisel made of copper and a hard rock, and they're using that as a pounder, and they're making a statue. Very interesting. But copper chisels can't carve hard stone. Copper's too soft. So here we have another picture. They have two sticks that are holding a rock that's diorite, a very hard rock, and they're pounding, making a statue. We have found hundreds of these statues from the earlier time frame in Egyptian history, not the later one. These are made out of some of the hardest rocks known to man. Look at the detail. You can look behind the ears, and there's folds behind the ear, just like a human ear has. What? This is incredible. How do you carve something like that? You learned it in school. To scratch something, you need to scratch it with something that is harder. What's harder than this? Nothing. That they had. They didn't have diamonds. There's no diamonds in Egyptian archaeology. If you look at what's called the Mohs hardness scale, you have talc and soapstone and gypsum. And you get up here, you get granite, quartz, sandstone, granite. This is like your countertops. Can you cut your countertop with your steel knife? No? I wouldn't try it. You might make a mistake and you can't fix it. But this is a pretty hard rock. But above that are beryl and topaz. Above that are carbide. You got any workmen here that like to grind things with carbide? Corundum, which is sapphire, and ruby. These are aluminum oxides. Emery, lady like to polish your fingers with emery board. I don't know if it's made of this or not, but it's called emery. And on top of that is diamond. Look at this bowl right here. This is, I believe, a granodiorite, an extremely hard rock. It is so perfectly round that even though it has a rounded bottom, it stands up. But it's also hollowed out on the inside. The walls are very thin. It couldn't be turned on a lathe because it has handles. Those aren't glued on there. They covered them with gold. They have found, about 10,000 of these bowls under the step pyramid. They're actually older than a step pyramid. So in the pre-dynastic period, the Egyptians were carving some of the hardest things we know of. They're all different, they're all beautiful, and no one knows how they did it. Now, there's a YouTube channel. They paid these two Ukrainian women for 2 years to try to make a bowl like that. And they did, and they used nothing but primitive techniques. I mean, it took them like months with a thing. It's a round circle thing with copper and corundum to carve out the center of the bowl. Months. Just twist, 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 twist. And they broke the core away, and so they carved it this way. But they didn't do that to it. They just carved it straight down. You can use a string to cut hard rock. And there's a documentary. I wish I could find it. These scientists were at one of the Pacific Islands and are wondering how these people had carved these giant stone things. And they don't have iron. They don't have, how do they do it? They're like, this is a big mystery. And one of the native boys goes, pfft, and he says, come with me. And he goes to the forest and he cuts down a vine. And he slices the vine with his knife and the sap oozes out. He goes down to the beach. He rolls it in the sand. He goes up to the rock. He goes, and because the sand was made of the same thing as the rock, it starts eroding the rock. So you don't need something harder than it. You need equal to or harder. But if you take a diorite stone and start hitting a piece of diorite, your stone's going to disintegrate at the same rate the thing you're hitting with is. You just need a lot of pieces. They could also carve holes. But the holes weren't carved with a drill. They were carved with a tube drill because they left the cores behind. A tube drill is like a pipe that's very thin, and as it spins or goes back and forth, you can cut down into rock. If you see any Egyptian documentary, they'll show people with diorite pounders, and all these tourists go, oh, this is funny, this is how they did it. Kung, 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 and they get something in their eye, And that is not how they cut hard rock with a big pounder. They even left it. By the way, this one right here, I took this picture in Georgia at Stone Mountain near the granite quarry. This is 1900s technology. It looks very similar to ancient Egyptian technology, where they somehow would score the rock and then crack it off and then pound it smooth, maybe. Have you ever heard of the unfinished obelisk? This is, you've seen obelisks, right? These tall, pointy things. This is 10 times bigger than most of those other objects. It's the biggest one they ever tried to make, apparently. but it's inside a mountain. In order to get this out, they would have had to cut all this material down. But this quarry in Aswan, it's near the river, and the river floods this every year, or used to. And so all they had to do is get this down into a boat. Granite is only about 2.5 times heavier than water, denser than water. So you just need a boat 2.5 times as big as the thing, plus a little extra, and it'll float. And they floated these things from here, 1,000 miles all the way down to Cairo every year. But looking around here, this is hard, and they didn't show us how they made this. Sir Flinders Petrie, famous archaeologist, Egyptologist, he wrote this in 1800s, maybe 1900s. The typical method of working hard stones, such as granite, diorite, or basalt, was by means of bronze tools. That's not true. These were set with cutting points far harder than the quartz, which was operated on. So if you have quartz, maybe you have diamonds, and you take a bronze tool and you somehow get the diamond stuck in there, and you start working on it. But what happens when you try to cut rock? It produces heat. The bronze gets soft, and the cutting point would fall out. But the material of these cutting points is yet undetermined, but only 5 substances are possible: beryl, topaz, chrysoberyl, corundum, or sapphire and diamond. The character of the work would certainly seem to point to diamond as the cutting jewel, but they didn't leave any diamonds behind. They did, however, depict them with bow drills. Now he's got a rock in his hand, so it's a cup, and there's a wooden spindle, and he's pulling back and forth, just like, you ever see someone try to start a fire with a bow drill? They generate a lot of friction, and he's cutting into, it looks like a piece of wood. Here's a 2-person drill like that. Interesting. But we have to cut things like this perfectly flat and cut holes in them. Here, there's a plaster core out of a hole. I've done this. In my marine biology world, I had a laboratory with a bunch of fish tanks, and I wanted my fish tanks to drain into a sump, so I took them and I cut holes in them, and I attached them to all these fancy plumbing stuff. Well, I used what's called a tube drill. I had a guy at the machine shop make me one. He took a copper pipe, and he made the edge very thin, and put it on an arbor so I could put it in the drill press. Took my fish tank, flipped it up under the drill press, lowered the drill press. I had a ring of modeling clay and water, because the water boiled. And I put corundum in there, and I went like this. More water. It took like an hour to cut through an 1/8 inch of glass. They do have drills like this, a hand crank, big weight, but that's not a tube drill, that's a point. And yet when you look at places like, these are door jambs in the Sphinx temple right next to the big pyramid. If you look up in here, there's a tube drill hole. This thing I showed you earlier, right between this guy's feet, there's a tube drill hole. They weren't using pounders. They were drilling the hardest rocks known to man with who knows what. Over at Saqqara, near that pyramid I told you earlier that was looted, there's all these things. In the wall, there's a scrap block with tube drill marks in it. There's these columns that were hollowed out. Back over where the unfinished obelisk is, it was my 3rd time there after we saw this tube drill. Like, wow, it's cool. My 3rd time there. I had already seen this block. They had hollowed it out in the middle and then snapped it off, and it was just sitting there. No one knows why. They left it there. But on the 3rd time, the sun was at just the right angle, where I noticed for the first time all of these drill holes. They were using tube drills to move massive things. I don't know how. It's incredible. This is cool. Over Saqqara again, there's a place called the Serapeum. Every X number of years, they would sacrifice and mummify a bull and put him into a giant granite sarcophagus. If I laid down, I would be shorter than the width of the sarcophagus. And these are underground. These came from the far north. They floated them down the river, the far south. They floated them down the river and brought them overland, up over hill, down into this gigantic necropolis with all of these giant stone things, and there was bulls inside each one. Notice how square the corner is here? That's an inside corner. 1, how do you cut granite? 2, how do you cut a square inside corner? I would have a hard time doing that in wood, even in my wood shop. And there it is. Now, if you look at the Great Pyramid, there is a sarcophagus in it. It's been beaten down by the years, but inside the sarcophagus, by the way, the corners are so sharp on the inside that a ballpoint pen is rounder than the corner. But there is marks. You see that horizontal thing right there? That's the edge of a tube drill that they tried to polish out, and they didn't quite do it perfectly. So we know they hollowed this out. At other places on the Giza Plateau near the big pyramids, I'm looking for this. I'm going to find it next time. There are marks of something that cut into the rock. In fact, one of these pyramids, one of these sarcophaguses, there's a cut mark, and then they backed up, straightened out the blade, and cut again. That means it must have been cutting pretty quickly, because you'd notice it going off. It was taking you months to cut it. We don't know how they did this. This is amazing. Going to Saqqara again, the step pyramid. This is the wall that encloses it. The first time they ever used large blocks. For the first pyramid ever built in Egypt, you can't see a joint between the blocks. How did they make blocks perfectly smooth? I don't know. And perfectly flat. I don't know. And they had to do this, because if there was a little bit of space in those blocks, just a little space, it would crack. And the whole wall would come tumbling down. This wall has stood for 4,000 years. Here's Unas again, just outside of the step pyramid. Here's some of the facing stones. But inside the pyramid, this is the first time the so-called pyramid text appears. This is late in Egyptian history. But this is made of alabaster, which is translucent. Put a flashlight on it, it lights up the rock from the inside. And these hieroglyphs, okay, you see the bunny rabbits? There's a bunny rabbit right there, the bunny rabbit, there's a bunny rabbit, there's a bunny. You see the bunny rabbits? That's the Egyptians for U. This is Unas. So his pyramid is full of bunny rabbits. That's kind of cool. Okay, let's talk about what everyone wants to hear about, the pyramids. I think these are boring. Compared to what I just showed you, this is just a big pile of rocks. It took a lot of experimenting, but it's just a big pile of rocks. Okay, I'm being overly dramatic, of course. A lot of people think that the pyramids are a reflection of the Tower of Babel. I do not believe that at all. Because we see, let me use the phrase, the evolution of the pyramids in Egypt. The earliest ones are called mastabas, or benches. They're just flat things. The first pyramid is actually a stack of 5 mastabas. It's not even a pyramid yet. His son, though, Senefru, built the bent pyramid, and the Maidem pyramid, where the outside is collapsed, and the red pyramid. In fact, you can walk from here to there in like 5 minutes. They're right next to each other. This is the first true pyramid of Egypt. It was the third one that he built. His father built the step pyramid. His son built the Great Pyramid. His son built the middle pyramid. His son built the smaller pyramid next to that. And that's the end of the Great Pyramid building era of Egypt. About 5 generations, and we're done. But inside of these things, we see amazing innovations. Because if you want to have a hole underneath 1 billion pounds of force coming down, you can't just have a chamber. A flat roof would collapse. So they built what's called a corbelled ceiling. They took these are granite blocks, and they stepped them in, went up, stepped it in, went up, stepped it in. So it takes the load and distributes it. And again, on the inside, there's no gaps between the blocks. They're perfectly square. Now, looking at Giza, we see it looks like an old shoreline. This is what they say. This is millions of years ago, blah, blah. No, this is the flood piling stuff up. By the way, the pyramids were not built before the flood. They could not be, because they're built out of these rocks. They cut these rocks and literally piled them up right next to where the pyramid is. And inside the pyramids themselves are all these fossils. These are called nummulites. Many nummulites. So they're made of flood-deposited rocks. And when you look at the area, this is right in front of the Great Pyramid, the dirt, there's all these hard rocks. And if you notice the percussion marks on them, that only happens, these percussion, these half-moon things, that only happens when rocks hit together at like 100 miles an hour. These things were being washed off the continent. We see things like this all around the continents. hard, rounded, percussion-marked rocks on the surface from the floodwaters that are coming off the earth and leaving stuff that's just behind. Now, if you go to the Great Pyramid and you look at it, right over here in the left corner, go around the corner. This is a really cool thing. This is the first couple of courses. These are not blocks. This is the ground. They cut the ground. And this is the level surface. So this is the same height as the other corner. They leveled off the ground and went step into the hard rock. And when you come up right about over here, look, there's clam fossils in there. Oh, that's really cool. So how do they build the pyramids? Ideas. No certainty, but ideas. One is called the external ramp model. This is an older one. Most people believe this for a long time until you realize that this external ramp has more volume than the pyramid itself. And where did it go afterwards? So that's a bit of a problem. Another one, what's that called? The long ramp model. The external ramp model, well, maybe the pyramid itself is a ramp, but that's a long walk. Not only that, if you're going to build this pyramid, you can't have outside stuff because the first thing you do, what do you do when you're building a building in the ancient world? What's the first thing you lay down? The cornerstone. And from the cornerstone, you sight your lines. In order to build a square, you need your corners perfect. You have to be able to see them. And as you're going up, the thing can't twist. It would be really hard to get each corner exactly perfect. But once you have the corners, you can fill in the middle. And that's what they did. There are blocks. You see block, 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 and then a quarter of a block. And the next row, block, 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 and a third of a block. They would fill in with blocks, and they'd carve a special block to fill in that last little hole that was left over. So this really doesn't work. My favorite, I don't know if this is true or not, my favorite was pioneered by a French architect named Houdin, and he suggested that they had an internal ramp. The middle pyramid, that Pharaoh's brother tried to build his own pyramid. It's north of the three great pyramids. It's over there. It's within eyesight, but it's in a military base, so you can't go there. But the people who have been there, it's all been dilapidated and dismantled, but the base is there, and there's clearly an internal ramp in that base. Clearly. Oh, this is it right here. Sorry. The Jeffreys Pyramid. It's clearly, I can't show you a good picture. But when you look at the Great Pyramid, there's a notch way up in the corner. You can see it's right up there. What's that notch there? Well, the notch, look at that. It's about as big as a person. And there are, beyond the notch, there's a hole. As if, and it's right where Houdin said that there would have been a turning point. Something like this, maybe. Maybe this is Herodotus' lifting devices he said he saw in Egypt, where you can go up a gentle slope, turn the block, and keep going. And then later on, they filled it in with rocks, and since it wasn't structural, when it fell away, the pyramid didn't collapse. A Japanese team took a gravitometer, very sensitive instrument for measuring gravity, and they put it all over the Great Pyramid and measured the gravity. And look at that. There are places with low gravity that are in the shape of a spiral, and the block, that notch is right there, as if there's an undiscovered spiral structure inside the Great Pyramid. Is that true? Don't know, but I want to know. If you look at what's called the Grand Gallery inside the Great Pyramid, way at the top, this is called the Great Step. The Egyptian Antiquities Authority, they actually concreted this in. They thought this was worn down from people stepping on it, so they flattened it with concrete. No, this is a rope notch. It's like that on purpose because this looks like a lifting device. Along the sides over here, there are roller marks in the rock, and there's ancient grease in the rock. As if ropes were coming down this whole thing, and there were rollers, and people on the other side were pulling and lifting gigantic heavy things up into the pyramid. Because what's in the middle of the Great Pyramid? Gigantic granite blocks. That's the king's chamber, way up in the air. And these things are many tons. They had to lift them up there somehow. This is probably an elevator. Don't know that, but I think it probably is. But when you look at the blocks themselves, They didn't get these things from far away. The quarry is literally right next to the pyramids. This is where they harvested the rocks to make the pyramids. But the outside of the pyramid was covered in white limestone that comes from about 10 miles away on the other side of the Nile. And the cool thing is that you have all these bedding planes. And if you keep all the rocks from the same bedding plane, the tops and the bottoms are already carved flat. They just snap right out. And they're all the same height. So on the pyramids, the casing stones, each row was the same height. The next row might be a different height, but they were all the same in that row. They took them from the quarry like that. And really interestingly, another bit of ancient Egyptian technology is called papyrus. They invented paper. And hieroglyphics. And the earliest papyrus we've ever found was found actually in a valley over here. I don't know why it was there, but it was there. This is a record of a gang of men who were harvesting the Tura limestone for the casing stones of the Great Pyramid. And we know how many men were there. We know how many days it took, how many tons of rock. They could take, on a 3-day round trip, 30 blocks or 80 tons per trip. That's about 1,000 blocks in a season for a 4-man team. As soon as you know that, you can build a pyramid. Because you say, I need this many blocks. How many men does that take? Okay. This times that, boom, that's how many man hours. Okay. I need to feed them a couple liters of beer and a couple loaves of bread per day, because that's what they were paid with, bread and beer. And as long as you know that, you know how much you can tax your farmers. Oh, we need to harvest this much grain from the farms to feed this population of workers. And as soon as you do that, you can build a pyramid. It's just a productivity experiment. And that's really cool. Now, oh man, I have so much more to talk about. I'm going to have to cut this short eventually. Let's talk about a place called Abu Simbel. You've seen pictures of it. Amazing. This is actually fake. You see all the blocks and the lines here? Those are from human saws. This was a single carved mountain down in an area that is now underneath Lake Nasser. But in the 1960s, as the lake is filling up after they built the Aswan Dam, the UN said, we have to rescue this. So they cut the whole mountain and took the blocks and brought them uphill and stacked them up and built a fake mountain on top of it. And when you go into this amazing thing, by the way, this is Ramses II. Ramses the Great, young, middle-aged, and old. That's him. But when you go through here, you go through this big hall. You go through a big hall. And then you go into the holy place, and then you see the Holy of Holies in the middle of it all. And there's 3 gods. This is the god of the underworld. I think this one's Ramses II, and these are the Amun-Ra and one of the other gods. I know their names, just forgetting them at the moment. But on his birthday, and on the other side of the solar cycle, on his coronation day, the sun rises and only shines on these 3. It doesn't light up the god of the underworld. When the UN rebuilt it with modern surveying and slide rules and all the best things, they built it wrong. It happens a day wrong. It's a day off. The ancient Egyptians were better at engineering than 1960s engineers. And it never stops. There are rocks in the Sphinx Temple that have 17 faces around. You know why these do this? You know why they do that? I think that's for earthquake protection. You see the same things in Peru. These kind of rock things. They have deep well shafts. It's called a nilometer. They can measure the thing. But you know what's missing? Arches. They have flat things. Domes. They never figured out the dome. Or the wheel. They don't have wheels when they build these things. Chariots don't arrive in Egypt until after the second intermediate period. So Ramses the Great, right? The Battle of Kadesh. He's got the reins tied around his waist at Abu Simbel, inside the temple. And he's shooting his arrows. And he's riding over his enemies. He's being trampled by his horses. Amazing. That is after the second intermediate period when the chariot got to Egypt. Before that, nothing. They didn't have wheels. So when they build a giant hall, they fill it with columns. There's not much space in these halls. Lots of big fat columns to hold these big fat rocks. That's the original paint. thousands of years and is still there. The new chamber they just found in the pyramid. Okay. So let's talk about these people. Who are they? What were they doing? Look at Genesis 1:27. It's called in Latin, the Imago Dei, the image of God. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Okay. So all humans have the image of God in them. Look at Acts 17:26 and 27. He, God, or Jesus, made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of the dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he's actually not far from each one of us. So who are the ancient Egyptians? They're descendants of Adam. They're descendants of Noah. They arrived in this great watery plain where they can grow tons of food, and their population absolutely exploded. Within a couple centuries of arriving, they were building pyramids and fighting with each other and inventing false gods and trying to explain eternity and the afterlife because they had forgotten the God of the Bible, like most people across the planet. Oh man, I could go preaching right now. That right there, from there, the gospel, New Testament, all this other stuff, but that's my summary of ancient Egypt. And since it's 11 p.m. on my clock, so it's 8 p.m. now, and we want to have time for questions, I'm going to skip ahead. Please, if you're interested in this, take a look at Creation Magazine. I know some people in this room get it. Thank you much. I know a lot of people don't get magazines anymore. Here's how I like to say it. If you subscribe to Creation Magazine, you are blessing us. And in return, we get to bless you with a beautiful magazine. Faith-affirming, full color, no advertising. There's amazing stuff in there. I wouldn't be where I am today had I not been reading Creation Magazine for 15 years before I got hired at CMI. But for a 2-year subscription, comes out 4 times a year, for a 2-year subscription, we'll also give you the digital version of the magazine, which you can read on any electronic thing, and we let you share it with other people. And I'm going to include Creation in the New Testament. This is a beautiful book. I remember when Lita was writing this, she said, hey, I'm going to write a book about all the times creation is mentioned in the New Testament. I'm like, okay, that'd be kind of short. And then she starts writing this book and talking to me about it, and I was shocked. It's everywhere. Every book, every chapter has got something to do with creation in it, and some books are entirely based on creation. So that is a great book, and it comes with a 2-year magazine subscription. Here's what a sign-up form looks like. Check off 1 or 2 years, put your address down there, and we'll mail it to you. Here comes Barry with the sign-up forms in case you're interested. If not, no big deal. Just help me pass them around. After that, you might be interested in my presentation, which I'm going to be giving Saturday morning, I think. Ancient DNA, Illuminating the Tapestry of Biblical Human History. Here I am saying, as a geneticist now, the ancient bones in the ground are singing a very biblical story. And if you listen, you can hear it. And it's telling us about Noah's flood and the Tower of Babel and the spreading out of people on the planet. I believe that my second talk on Saturday is going to be very similar to this, the historical Adam, theological conundrums and scientific implications. There's basically 7 reasons to believe in the biblical Adam, from genetics mainly. This is also on our website, on our streaming site, the first streaming video we produced, and it's free. So you can go to creation.com, click on store, or type in the historical Adam. You'll find this, and you can watch it for free off of our website. Take a look at Evolution's Achilles' Heels, the book and the documentary, powerful materials, whole section on genetics in there that I wrote. Not much about history yet, but we're working on some history books right now. Or look at Biblical Biology 101, my favorite book because it's the only book in existence that only has my name on the cover. That was a 2-year project, a lot of work, a lot of fun. But check this out. Coming soon. First Adam to Last Adam, an introduction to biblical genealogy. This will be my second book. I expect it out by the end of the year, maybe January at the most. This is a prototype of the cover, not the final cover, but I'm very, very happy with how this came out. It's going to be a beautiful book full of amazing biblical ideas. Okay. I'm going to leave it there, and it's time for questions. I don't like long question and answer sessions because they drone on or people start getting silly. So let's do a short one. Can we do 15 minutes? So we can stop at 20 after? Okay. No one said no. But there's some rules here. First rule is, I don't want to be tempted to say something that might contradict what's preached from this pulpit. And I don't necessarily know every doctrinal position this church holds. I probably agree with them, but I don't know that. So can we avoid end times theology, roles of men and women in the church, a free will versus predestination, King James or not King James? We can handle not asking those questions, right? If you ask me a question, I'll try to answer it quickly and give you something to answer it more fully. Please make your question end in a question mark. Sometimes people have stories. One time a guy in Australia had this prophecy, this dream that God had shown him that no one else in the world was ready for. And I was like, Pastor, please stop him, please. So we're not going to do that, right? All right. And the last little thing, even though this doesn't really count anymore, doesn't matter anymore, but please don't ask me anything about COVID-19. Because it doesn't matter how I answer, someone will get mad. And we've already gone through that. Let's just not do it anymore, okay? All right. Let's go. Who's got the first question?
Okay, put up your hand and I'll bring the microphone around so everybody can hear the question as well as the answer. First one.
You know, that first question is always the hardest question. So now that we've got the gnat out of the way, who's got the second question? In the back. Hey, it worked. Heinz, right in the back, way back there.
Okay.
You mentioned core drills and things like that.
Yes.
But not finding any diamonds.
Yes.
Have you found any evidence of what they cut it with?
No. We know they had core drills. They have the cores are left every place. We have tubes that are gone down, and there's a little fragment of something in the bottom that was partially cut. But they didn't have copper like that. And even if they did, I mean, you can't have copper this long in a tube. It'll warp as it gets hot. So they pulled the thing out, they snapped off the thing, pulled it out somehow, cut down a little more, pulled the thing out, snapped it off. That's how we would do it. But they didn't draw pictures of it, and they didn't tell us how they did it. But they were smart, and they were doing things that are astounding and beautiful and amazing, and that's all I got for you. I'm wanting someone to go to one of those holes that doesn't poke all the way through and get some sample thing down there and suck up some of the dust, but no one's done it yet.
Another question? By the way, what are the dates of the next tour in March?
I don't know the exact dates. The first one's in February, and I think that bleeds into March, and there's 5 days in between, and the second one's in early March. It's on our website, just Tour Egypt with CMI. It's right on the front page. I answered all your questions,
Yeah.
or I bewildered you all, or you think I'm a kook and you just want me to walk away. This is very interesting.
I was just wondering if you found any evidence for like the grain storage that Joseph built, and because those would have had to have been huge to supply the food for so long.
Yes, that's a great question. There are some who think the pyramids were Joseph's grain storage devices. That is absolutely moronic. Sorry if anyone believes that. That comes to us from Ron Wyatt, who I don't trust anything he ever said, because the pyramids are solid with very small spaces. That's the worst way to build a grain storage device. I don't know how they stored their grain. I imagine because they mainly built things out of mud bricks, that they built a bunch of mud brick storage units, but mud bricks don't last because it does rain in Egypt. I mean, King Tut's tomb was partially buried by a mud flow, and that's why it survived. No one found it because it's buried under debris. So it does rain. In fact, I've been at the pyramids, and it was dripping water from the sky and in the ground. What? In fact, the last time I was there from my hotel room, I could see the pyramids, except it was raining. So I couldn't see them. So mud bricks disintegrate over time. I'm just guessing that, because why would you build storage thing out of stone? That'd be really hard. But and plus, there's a lot we haven't excavated yet. Tons we haven't excavated. Yeah. But there's good evidence for the Israelites in the Goshen region. They found Semitic peoples living there at the right time. But that's all I know.
Have you, another question of it, have you looked at trying to compare the Egyptian chronology with the biblical
Yeah.
chronology?
Yeah. The Egyptian chronology matches the biblical chronology very well from those 5 pharaohs that are named in Egypt. They line up with the Bible just beautifully. Before that, though, everything goes haywire. The Egyptian chronology is based mainly on the work of a Greek historian named Manetho. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, then he died and his kingdom got broken up into 4 pieces. There was a Greek in Babylon named Berosus who was writing a history trying to make Babylon older than every other culture to make them more important. Well, oh no, Manetho says, no, Egypt's more older. So he writes this history of Egypt that is bad. He took entire dynasties where we know that they're actually warring, fighting like city-states, and he did that to them. Even though we know they're contemporaneous now, he did that. And we know it's a political document because Manetho left off King Tut and his father, Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, and Queen Hatshepsut. He left entire line out because it's political. He didn't want a female in his line. And King Tut, man, he's just crazy. So, well, crazy. He's the son of the heretic pharaoh, so he got erased. You can't trust anything in Egyptian history. When you see a facade with all these kings listed, that is the pharaoh trying to justify his existence. It's a political document, it's not history. And that's true. There are Babylonian kings. We know that Babylonian king claimed a victory that his grandfather had fought. And we know the Egyptians never mentioned battles they had lost. The famous Battle of Kadesh, with Ramses II trampling over his foes, they lost that battle. But his entire tomb or temple at Abu Simbel is his triumphant victory over the Assyrians. No, it's not true. Well, that didn't lose that battle. Both sides lost. They fought and they walked away. No, there was no clear winner. But he claimed he won. So they never admitted to defeats. They also never mentioned the names of their enemies. Ever. They called them funny names, but not the real names. Because to name your enemy would be to give him a voice in the afterlife. Probably one reason why the Bible never names the name of Pharaoh until much later. And the first Pharaoh that's named is a non-Egyptian Pharaoh. I think all 5 of those pharaohs are not Egyptians. Etc. So Egyptian history is too long. But that's because of Manetho and because of carbon dating. But carbon dating stretches out the further back in time you go. And we know that. Egyptologists are frustrated with carbon dating because they've got their history, and the carbon dates say it's older than they think it is. And it gets worse the further back you go. In fact, that was known when carbon dating was invented by Sir Leonard Woolley in the 1940s. He used Egyptian sarcophagus lids to validate carbon dating. He said in the 1940s, this is strange because there's a systematic error. And the older I go with these coffin lids, these sarcophagus lids, the older the carbon date is. It separates from history and does that. So Egyptian history needs to be redone. It doesn't threaten me because I know it's actually a house of cards. Sorry, preaching about that.
Okay.
I go a long time on that one.
I'm sure that was just a short summary.
Short summary.
Well, I believe there's several pharaohs, aren't there, whose tombs have not yet been discovered? Was there any chance of another Tutankhamun type treasure being discovered?
We have nearly all of the pharaohs. All the pharaohs of the New Kingdom, we have them. It's the Middle Kingdom pharaohs that the evidence is sporadic. The Old Kingdom, we don't have any pharaohs at all. There's no mummies. Mummies of the pharaohs. There's no mummies ever found in the Great Pyramids or in the Step Pyramid. We don't know actually what happened to the mummies, if they were there at all. They sure do look like burial places, but there's no evidence of burial in them. But the later ones we have essentially all the pharaohs. In fact, there was a tourist trap in Niagara Falls that for a long time, and they had a mummy, like a real Egyptian mummy they bought in the 1800s. And the Egypt's like, hey, can we have our mummy back? It's like, why? You used to throw your mummies into trains, to coal-burning trains, to fire your trains. They would take mummies and throw them in there and burn them in their trains. That's how much you cared about your own history. And we got this in the 1800s. We're going to keep it. Well, the shop finally shut down. And it was bought by the Carlos Museum at Emory University in Atlanta. And the curator said, as soon as she opened up the crate, she knew it was a royal mummy based on the smell. Because pharaohs had the more expensive stuff and commoners didn't. And then they pulled DNA out of it, and sure enough, it was Ahmose the First or something like that. It was one of the really important early New Kingdom pharaohs. It didn't get burned up in the thing, and it was sitting up in Niagara Falls. Anyway.
Rob, can you clarify, you said something earlier about it being 215 years, the timeline, because I read in Exodus 12, verse 40, that they're there for 430 years, so I didn't quite understand at the beginning.
Yes, Exodus 12:40 says they were there for 430 years. I'm going to pull this up here. Hold on. So this is a large contention within scholarship, and it's been going on for a very long time. You know Archbishop Usher, who calculated the age of the earth 4004 BC? He couldn't have done that if he used 430 years here. He used 215 years. So this goes back centuries. Here's how it works. Exodus 12. The time the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. Okay, done. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. The Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, and the Samaritan Pentateuch both say the time the people lived in Egypt and Canaan was 430 years. Oh. Also, the Hebrew here might mean had lived in Egypt, as in ambiguous. And English translations make it a little more firm. So there might be some wiggle room. So we have this debate, 430 or 215. Genesis 5. Why did I do that? I don't know. Da-da-da, sorry, there's that. Where was it? I thought I had this whole argument right here. Okay, I have another talk. I got it. Give me a second. I know we're getting out of time, but I'm going to pull up this talk, and I'm going to have it right here. It's biblical genealogy, or is it? There it is, right there. I just pulled up the wrong talk. There's Archbishop Usher, 4004 BC. Okay. Okay, I'm almost there. I'm going through all the world history right now. Okay, here is the Septuagint version. They add "and Canaan," and the Samaritan Pentateuch flips that Canaan into Egypt. Galatians 3. This is the key. Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring. It does not say "and to offsprings," referring to many, but referring to one, and to your offspring, who is Christ. This is what I mean. The law, which came 430 years afterward, after what? After the promise was made to Abraham and Christ. Oh. So that's the big argument for the short sojourners right there in Galatians chapter 3. Paul really does say it started with Abraham. But what is this? What promise? It's a smoking fire pot promise. When Abraham fell asleep, it's that promise. Now, this affects the age of the earth also, by the way, because you have to know how old Abraham was when he came out of Haran, 75 years old. But that wasn't the year this promise was made. No, he moved to Succoth, he went to Beersheba, he went to the Negev, he went to Egypt, he came back, he rescued Lot, tied to Melchizedek, and then, the covenant of circumcision is in there, and after all this stuff happens, then the smoking fire pot dream. So he's about 80-ish. That affects the age of the universe by 5 years. Well, that's cool. But this is the linchpin for the short sojourn argument. Now, I'm not saying it is true. There is a debate within Christianity, but I don't know a significant scholar who says 430 years. Even the conservative ones, not the liberal ones. The Bible-believing scholars, I think they all say, all the ones I know anyway, 215, but it's not 215, it's 210. Because it depends on how old Abraham was when the smoking fire pot dream happened. So that's my argument. And then we get into genealogy, and you realize that in a short sojourn, you can get all the names lined up, etc. Sorry for being so short. My article, How Long Were the Israelites in Egypt? And an article, I don't have it on the bottom here. If you just go to creation.com, type in sojourn, they'll reference everything of the articles, and I definitely have written one about the short sojourn. Plus pros and cons of the argument, and why people say it was less than 430 years. I want it to be 430 years. I don't want to lose 2.5 centuries of archaeology. That makes it harder to squeeze archaeology into biblical history. It actually makes the universe 215 years shorter. Younger. What? But everywhere I turn, every time I've looked at one of these contentions, I've been forced to go toward the more conservative position, and my earth has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter. And I want it bigger, because then my life is easier. But I can't do that. I'm not going to sacrifice Scripture for my own wants. I'm just telling you, the old man in me wants to stretch this out, because my life gets easier. All right. Is that okay?
That
All right.
sort of answers the question, right? There's more work to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll end with that then, with the Q&A.